Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another Jane Austen July video. And today I'm going to be recommending you some Elizabeth Gaskell books based on your taste in Jane Austen. So, Jane Austen is one of my absolute favourite authors of all time, and so is Elizabeth Gaskell. And I think these two authors have quite a lot in common, or maybe it would be better to say quite a lot of overlap. I think if you like Jane Austen, you will probably like Elizabeth Gaskell. And I think there are particular Austen works and particular Gaskell works that kind of go hand in hand. So today I want to pair up some Elizabeth Gaskell novels and some Jane Austen novels and recommend you some Gaskell novels based on your taste in Jane Austen and vice versa. I love Elizabeth Gaskell a lot. She is a pretty well-known writer, I would say, but she is definitely like less well-respected and less well-beloved than Jane Austen. And I think that she deserves to be as loved and as well-respected as Jane Austen. I love her and respect her as much, probably, as Jane Austen. They are, you know, my joint second favourite authors, along with Anthony Trollope, with Charles Dickens still reigning supreme just about at the top. But I love Elizabeth Gaskell and Jane Austen so much, and I think they're both wonderful writers. And while I would say Gaskell tends to be slightly darker in tone than Jane Austen, I do think that if you like one, you will like the other. There is a bit of a time gap between these two, so Jane Austen is a Regency writer, early 19th century writer, and Elizabeth Gaskell is a Victorian writer. But despite the decades that separate them and the different tones they adopt, I do think that they are two writers that pair quite well together. So I've gone through Jane Austen's main 6 novels and tried to think about what Elizabeth Gaskell book I think pairs best with each book. I have ended up combining 2 Austen books together with one Gaskell recommendation for both, and I haven't found a Austen pair for every Gaskell novel, if that makes sense. Elizabeth Gaskell wrote more things than Jane Austen, and her books are very, very varied, which is one of the things I love about Elizabeth Gaskell. Like, she writes in a lot of different genres and a lot of different kinds of books, and some of her books I couldn't match up with a Jane Austen book. But regardless, I hope this will be a fun and potentially useful video. So let's begin with Pride and Prejudice, because, you know, it's the best. And if you love Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, I think you will love North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. These 2 books have lots of things in common in terms of their central love story. So Pride and Prejudice is the tale of the Bennet family, 5 daughters and their parents. And the daughters know that one of them is going to have to marry well, really, because their father's estate is entailed away from the female line, and after his death, none of them will have anywhere to live, unless they happen to get married to somebody who can support them. And we're following the 2 elder sisters of the family, Jane and Elizabeth, and what happens when they meet 2 young men, Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy. Jane immediately really likes Mr. Bingley, and Elizabeth immediately hates Mr. Darcy. But while Elizabeth may hate Mr. Darcy certainly does not hate Elizabeth, and, you know, everything goes on from there. North and South is about a young woman called Margaret Hale, who has grown up in the rural south of England but ends up moving to the north of England after her father gives up his profession as a clergyman. The family relocate to the industrial mill town of Milton, aptly named. It's a thinly veiled version of Manchester. And in Milton, Margaret encounters various people, including a factory owner called Mr. Thornton, who she hates immediately and who does not hate her. And the love story in these 2 books has a lot in common. Like, the love story in North and South follows a lot of the beats of the love story from Pride and Prejudice, and I think if you like one, you will like the other. I love North and South so much. I mean, I love Pride and Prejudice so much too. These are 2 of my favourite books of all time. And North and South has my favourite love story ever, I think, in it. Like, I would say that the love story in North and South I love even more than the love story in Pride and Prejudice. Even though the love story in North and South may feel familiar in some places, it's also just so rich and so beautiful and so powerful. And also there is so much else going on in this book too. Grief is a really big theme in this book, and there's also a lot of really interesting exploration of factory towns in the Victorian period, of the disputes between employers and employees. There's a lot about strikes and struggle and the social inequality present within manufacturing towns. And it's just a fantastic book. I think I have fondly referred to North and South before as Pride and Prejudice and Industrialisation. And there is so much more to this book than that, but I just think if you like Pride and Prejudice, you will really love North and South. And I love them both a lot. Then if you love Northanger Abbey and all of its Gothic glory, I think you will enjoy Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales. So Northanger Abbey is a novel that really riffs on the Gothic. It is a parody of Gothic novels in many ways, and we are following a young woman called Catherine who meets someone from a place called Northanger Abbey, and because Catherine reads a lot of Gothic novels, she starts to imagine all kinds of mysterious and creepy things about Northanger Abbey. There's a lot more to this book than that, but I love the way that Northanger Abbey plays with the Gothic, and I think if you enjoy that element of Northanger Abbey, you will really love Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales. So Elizabeth Gaskell, as I said, is a very varied writer. She wrote in a lot of different genres, and she wrote quite a lot of short stories and novellas that are Gothic. I think Gaskell's Gothic Tales were all published separately in magazines during her lifetime, but Penguin have a bind-up of what they call her Gothic Tales, which I listened to on audiobook a few years ago, as well as having read a lot of the stories separately many times. And it's a really great collection with a lot of really wonderful Gothic tales, really wonderful spooky happenings, ghost stories and strange occurrences, and murder and disguise and escape. I think Catherine Morland from Northanger Abbey would have really enjoyed Elizabeth Gaskell's Gothic Tales, and if you love Northanger Abbey, I think you will too. Then if your favourite Jane Austen book is Emma, I would like to recommend you Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. These two books both look really interestingly at small town life. And if you would like to read a book that mostly features a bunch of characters a bit like Miss Bates from Jane Austen's Emma, then you really need to read Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell, because it is kind of a town of Miss Bates's, and I love it so much. I love it more than Emma, I would say, though I do love Emma a lot too. One of my favourite things about Emma as a novel is the way it looks at small town society, and the way it looks at all the gossip and insularness of a small town. And I love the character of Miss Bates a lot. And Cranford is another novel about small towns. And it is such a delight in so many ways. It's so funny and so entertaining. It's very episodic, but you're basically following a group of older women in this town and all of their antics. These women are all of a similar social position to Miss Bates in Emma, in that most of them are unmarried women, though some of them are widows, and they're all from a respectable background, upper middle, upper class, but they don't have very much money, but they are kind of trying to pretend that they have more money than they do. And I just feel like if you like Miss Bates in Emma, and if you like the small town feel, you will just love Cranford. I'm going to read you the beginning of Cranford because I just always smile every time I read the beginning of Cranford. In the first place, Cranford is in possession of the Amazons. All the holders of houses above a certain rent are women. If a married couple come to settle in the town, somehow the gentleman disappears. He is either fairly frightened to death by being the only man in the Cranford evening parties, or he is accounted for by being with his regiment, his ship, or closely engaged in business all the week in the great neighbouring commercial town of Drumble, only 20 miles on the railroad. In short, whatever does become of the gentlemen, they are not in Cranford. What could they do if they were there? Cranford is just an utter delight, and I think if you love the small town elements of Emma, you will really enjoy Cranford. If your favourite novel by Jane Austen is Persuasion, then I would like to recommend you Sylvias Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. Now, it's worth saying that Sylvias Lovers is definitely a much darker book than Persuasion, and it's definitely one of Elizabeth Gaskell's darker, sadder, more tragic books. While I am recommending Sylvia's Lovers to you if you like Persuasion, I would also like to recommend Sylvia's Lovers to you if you like Thomas Hardy. But anyway, there are a few reasons why I have paired these two books together. One, I think, is because Persuasion is probably the more serious, sombre of Jane Austen's books, and Sylvia's Lovers is definitely one of Elizabeth Gaskell's more serious, sombre books, but also because these books have a sort of naval connection and look at the Napoleonic Wars. So Sylvia's Lovers, though written during the Victorian period, is set in the very late 18th century, and the Napoleonic Wars and the Navy, and especially press ganging, has quite a big, prominent role in Sylvia's Lovers. And I think if you find the sort of Navy elements in Persuasion interesting, then I think you'll find them really interesting in Sylvia's Lovers too. Sylvia's Lovers is a wonderful, really powerful novel about a young woman torn between two men. One who she has known for a long time and who she likes, but maybe she doesn't love, and another man who she is falling for, but maybe things aren't going to quite work out there. And it's such a powerful, poignant novel. And I feel like if you like the sort of like wistful sorrow of persuasion, then I feel like you will really enjoy Sylvia's Lovers too. Finally, I have paired up Sense and Sensibility and Mansfield Park here, and if you love these two books, or one or both of them, then I would really like to recommend you Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I love Wives and Daughters so much, and I feel like actually tonally this is probably the most Austen-esque of Elizabeth Gaskell's novels. I feel like this is the one that you will definitely like if you're an Austen fan. As I said, Elizabeth Gaskell's books are quite varied and different, and she wrote in a lot of different genres and a lot of different styles, but I do feel like if you love Jane Austen, you will love Wives and Daughters. Wives and Daughters is a wonderful, beautiful coming-of-age story about a young girl called Molly Gibson, and what happens when her father decides to remarry and a new stepmother and stepsister come into her life. It is a book about grief, about unrequited love, about growing up, and about trying to understand the people around you, and I just love everything about it. It is such a wonderful book. And the reason why I have paired this with both Sense and Sensibility and Mansfield Park is because in my mind, I have always thought of Sense and Sensibility and Wives and Daughters in connection with each other. I think because Molly Gibson and her stepsister, Cynthia Kirkpatrick, are very, very different young women. And the book looks really interestingly at these two very different young women, the contrast between them, how they don't quite understand each other, even though they become really good friends and are really, really fond of each other. And that always makes me think of Eleanor and Marianne in Sense and Sensibility. The fondness between these two sisters and these two stepsisters, and the differences between them and their difficulty in understanding each other, like, really has a lot in common, and is the reason why I always think of these two books together. However, there's a lot about unrequited love in Wives and Daughters, as there is in Mansfield Park. I can definitely see some similarities in personality between Molly Gibson and Fanny Price, and Cynthia Kirkpatrick and Mary Crawford. Probably most of all between Mary Crawford and Cynthia Kirkpatrick. I think Molly has a lot more of a temper than Fanny Price has. Love them both as characters, though I have a special place in my heart for Molly. Anyway, but I also think some of the sort of like complicated family dynamics that Molly experiences in Wives and Daughters, and her sort of quiet unhappiness at home, because the home that she now has with these extra family members is not the home that she loved, and not the home that she wants. And I feel like that exploration of home as a theme in both of these two books is something I really, really enjoy. I also kind of feel like Molly's stepmother is like a weird combination of Mrs. Norris and Lady Bertram from Mansfield Park. She's definitely less horrible than Mrs. Norris, and she's definitely a more complicated character. You know, I think Jane Austen likes to play with caricature sometimes, whereas I feel like Elizabeth Gaskell is more of a realist. But I definitely think there are some similarities to be drawn between like Molly's relationship with her stepmother in Wives and Daughters and Fanny's relationship with her aunts in Mansfield Park. And I just think that if you love the sister element of Wives and Daughters and the unrequited love element and like the complicated family setup element of Mansfield Park, then you will really love Wives and Daughters. And in general, I just do think that if you love Jane Austen, you really should read Wives and Daughters, because it's so good. And I love it, and I feel like it's a book that will really appeal to people who like Jane Austen. I reread Wives and Daughters quite recently, and I just love it so much every time I read it. I should say Wives and Daughters is unfinished, but it's only like a tiny bit unfinished. Like, it's not like The Mystery of Edwin Drood by Charles Dickens, where he got halfway through writing and died. It's not like Jane Austen's unfinished books, where she wrote 5 chapters and then passed away. Wives and Daughters is a long book with about 2 chapters missing from the end, and you know exactly what's going to happen, and it's still really satisfying, but you don't have the very final last scene. Which is very sad, but it's still such a great book and still really worth your time, and it still feels really satisfying in the end, because like she wrote enough that it is very, very clear what was going to happen in the final chapter. Elizabeth Gaskell died when she had, you know, pages left to write. And yeah, I definitely think Wives and Daughters is the top Elizabeth Gaskell book I would recommend for fans of Jane Austen. So there we go. I hope this video has encouraged you to try some books by Elizabeth Gaskell if you haven't already. I hope this encourages you to think about the similarities and links between some of Gaskell's works and some of Jane Austen's works. I don't know to what extent Elizabeth Gaskell was inspired by Jane Austen's books. I feel like she must have been, definitely North and South, I feel, must have been inspired directly by Pride and Prejudice, but I don't know. I haven't read anything about the links between them, but I would be interested to find out more. And I do really, really think that if you like one, you will like the other, especially in the sort of pairings I have suggested today. So I hope this has been an interesting and useful video. Please do let me know down in the comments your thoughts on Elizabeth Gaskell as a writer, if you've come across her before, and if there are any other authors you'd like me to sort of pair up with Jane Austen in this way, do let me know. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another Jane Austen July video.